So, I was checking out the DC universe lately, and I was wondering, is there a scientific reason for magic in the DC universe? And the thing is, it's not just Dr. Fate, it's also the Lantern Corps, and also, Barry Allen and the Speed Force, and also the giant fucking barrier around existence that is known as the Source Wall, which I don't know if it's supposed to stretch out or stay stationary because, like, think about it, if it's beyond all of existence, I mean, we're talking about 14 billion light years in radius, plus another 14 billion light years in radius. Is it 15 billion light years away from the center of existence, or is it 30 billion light years from the center of existence? Because the light from the farthest particle away from us would radiate out. So you'd have double the distance, or roughly double the distance, subatomic particles emitting energy, blah, 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 blah. So let's start with some things I'm thinking about. There used to be this show called Battlestar Galactica, which is like, if you watch it as a singular thing, if you binge on it, it's like a 1 week play of sci-fi concepts specifically designed to, like, it was one of the first planned sci-fi series. It had 5 seasons. It had ancient immortal energy beings and blah 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 and whatever. And one of the concepts was ascending to a higher level. So during one episode of the show, there was this one psychic guy who had been experimented on, and he would evolve his psychic power further and further and further and get stronger and stronger and stronger, and then at some point he became an energy being. He left the space station, Babylon 5, that's the space station. He ended up evolving out of this plane of existence. So the way you can explain psychics in science is they don't exist, but if they began to exist, because that's actually something that's in Babylon 5. Psychics didn't come out of nowhere. They didn't magically evolve in a radically different way from the rest of their species. They were made by a species that was ancient and ascended and whatever. So psychics were made, and the way you can make a psychic is by creating a not exactly a biology, but something like biology using subatomic particles. That's how I think you can make someone psychic. You can use subatomic particles, entangle them in them, make them specifically coordinated around certain impulses. And biology started off with as a couple of complex chemicals which could replicate replicate themselves further and further and further. So why not develop someone with subatomic particles? So something like that with subatomic particles. So the subatomic version of DNA can make you a psychic. You just tie it into your regular DNA and you become a psychic. It thinks like a computer, blah, blah, blah. It probably needs centuries to evolve, but the point is, these psychics evolving to an energy state is not out of the question if you have subatomic biology, subatomic version of biology. Existing as an energy being is just existing with a greater complexity on a subatomic level, right? So what if you continually evolved and became kind of like an ever-present mist? So your existence being on a subatomic level, you can let all the individual parts of your body, of your mind, exist across miles of territory at the same time and exist on a subatomic level without interfering with the atomic or molecular scale of things. And here's the thing. There's this other show called DS9, a Star Trek show, also set in the 90s, also screened at the 90s, but whatever. And there was an episode of DS9 where they're essentially next to a wormhole. And all of a sudden, this tiny little galaxy shows up, hits their ship, and just begins to evolve, to grow. It's actually a universe at its earliest stages, and this universe begins to grow and grow, and it becomes a universe. They get rid of it, but the point is, if you become someone who thinks on a subatomic level, and you keep on evolving to near Planck scale level, your thoughts, by operating on a level smaller than even light, would be faster than light. And you yourself would be so hyper efficient that concepts you think about, you can actually forge into existence. So if you want, you can create a universe or a star or something. Maybe not a universe, but definitely a star or a galaxy even. And if you keep on evolving past our perceptive level of existence, you could be an ever-present cosmic force which has left its more human memories behind, right? So let's say you evolved past your mortal existence or past your simple energy existence, and centuries pass. Maybe the speed of your thoughts slows down, maybe it speeds up at various different stages along your evolution. So, it's actually not necessarily evolution, it's actually transformation process, because evolution is a completely different thing. But the point is, say you're living in a world where billions of years ago a cosmic entity came into existence, and now it's ever present, but it doesn't usually connected to the human world. It's aware of it because it exists and it's a cosmic being, but it doesn't really keep in touch with it. Now, say someone by accident, purely by accident, repeats, reinvents an ancient song that this being is used to. This grabs this being's attention, and whether it's its whole attention or whether it's a part of its memory that you're pulling on, summoning, this thing would have the ability to manipulate the energy around you to observe you, or this being, purely by paying attention to you, can generate energy on our level of existence. So, in order to understand subatomic, in order to understand our level of existence, the smaller than light shape of its existence would create subatomic particle structures that pay attention to molecular structures, which pay attention to small structures, which pay attention to our world. So it can draw in light energy from our immediate existence, and or it could create its, or it could just basically leave an imprint of its thoughts of existence. Basically, the point is, if you push electricity through a computer, the electricity that goes into a computer comes out sequenced, right? So a living thing which has evolved throughout levels of existence, paying attention to you, paying attention to your song, would create some sort of after effect. If it does, if it actually creates a sort of after effect, this sort of after effect could be a type of energy which could be utilized potentially, or it could be menacing and untamable. Now imagine the following. You're an ancient species, you discover this force, and this force not paying attention to a song, but it can actually pay attention to emotions. So you figure out how to harness emotions out of existence. Maybe it's paying attention created an energy which was unnoticed by humanity until it became sentient itself and roams existence. So the ancient beings inside the lantern batteries, those things could be the force, the consequence of these ancient hyper-evolved beings paying attention to existence. So how does this create lantern rings? How does willpower power their rings? Now, logically speaking, I think the lantern ring would be different levels of powerful depending on the emotion around it. So if you use it on small scale against a couple of people, the lantern ring should be empowered by the emotion of the people around you and give you a little bit of a jolt. if you use it in the middle of a war, it should get really, really powerful. If you use it on a scale where an entire planet becomes aware that they're about to be destroyed, those emotions could affect your lantern ring. And also, I think that the more you use a lantern ring in a certain area, the more powerful this invocation of energy should be. And this whole creation of constructs thing, it's mostly just teaching the energy of the ring to figure out how to do stuff. Really. I mean, I think that a lantern ring could recharge itself without the need for a battery, but slowly over time. And I think that different forces should logically reinforce the powers of those rings. Now, with a being like Mogo connecting to a lantern ring, Mogo, the living planet, which obtains a lantern ring in the DC universe, becomes a Green Lantern planet. Now, an entire planet feeling emotions would make sense, empowering Mogo to become ever more incredibly capable, incredibly powerful, so on, whatever. So, what does this mean? I think this means that the beings on our level of existence, which figure out that there's these greater forces out there that you can connect to, would naturally assume that connecting to these greater forces would be easier than to figure out how they can gradually evolve using science and whatever, right? So you have cosmic forces, people finding out how to use cosmic forces, cosmic energies out there, but they're not people who actually evolved out of existence. They're just people who harness the power of people who evolved out of existence. That makes sense on so many levels. And by those people thinking up concepts, I am eternity, I am destiny, I am death, so on, whatever, they would channel their philosophies into the energy itself. The energy itself creating what we see in the DC universe, in the Marvel universe, whatever. This philosophical imprint of energy in existence, these philosophical concepts molding existence into ideas, concepts, so on, whatever, the more you think about it, the more realistic it is that things like this are possible. Now, the thing is, the question is, what happens if there is this event in Marvel Comics where Thanos uses the Infinity Gauntlet to become very powerful, and he decides to evolve himself out of existence to a greater level as a cosmic being, whatever. And by evolving into a cosmic being, he leaves his body behind. So what if a cosmic being actually evolved past its cosmic existence? What if it detaches from its body, or maybe another cosmic being decides to kill it, or he just falls asleep? There's a concept called the oversoul, which exists in the phantom zone, where existing or not existing within a certain area of space is up to the thoughts of this being called the overforce. So, by creating all these concepts, you create the ideas, you recreate the ideas that we have in our lifetime, right? We have art forms that are about ranking and developing different sections, different tiny bits of concepts of evil, good, morality, time, expectations, whatever. What if these cosmic beings, by evolving to a cosmic level and being either unconscious or evolving past our universe or whatever, leave behind specifically their body's connection to these forces, to these concepts of these philosophical concepts of existence, and emboldening these concepts of existence to a level where they can actually affect the universe on a cosmic scale. So what do I mean by this? The source wall, this area of existence around all of existence, that could be a manifestation of the question, the eternal question of what's out there beyond what we know. And this source wall, by being a psychic phenomena around our universe, would be a psychic phenomena around our universe, but also, let's get sidetracked. Let's talk about the concept of time in the DC universe for a second. In order for time travel to be possible, time has to be something. You know, you cannot go back 5 minutes without 5 minutes ago there being something there. So you're essentially moving around the concept of time that exists outside perceptible reality. So we know that there is something like 52 universes adjacent to the central universe of the Arrowverse, and one of them contains Supergirl, one of them contains Supergirl X. Right? So that's 53 places. Okay. Why is that? What's up with that? What if, and this is going on 3 different points that I've noticed in time travel and parallel dimensions in the Arrowverse. So, number 1, when someone from the Arrowverse, from a different reality, shows up in the main Arrow, in another reality, right? Basically, Flash goes back in time, changes time, experiences this parallel history, but realizes that he should go back in time again and fix everything. But when he fixes everything, it's slightly imperfect, but someone from a different reality who shows up notices there's changes in the reality of the Flash. So if someone in another reality can notice that there's changes in your reality, why would that be possible? The realities intermesh. Changing time in one reality shouldn't not affect things in a different reality, unless if the other reality is time itself. So, on an episode of DC Legends of Tomorrow, someone gets killed. He vanishes. They move their time ship back to a point where he didn't die, and he reappears. In order to exit time, to move through time, you need to bring along your time with you. A time ship goes outside of time into a different layer of time, a different scale of existence. Their time is one dimension above time known to people, right? One scale of time beyond our time. By moving the ship backwards, you revitalize the substance of existence of a person, because that person's time still remains in your ship. So moving time, a space of time around, that makes sense. We know that time in the Flash universe is essentially like an iceberg that melts and refreezes constantly, right? Barry goes back in time, he changes a little bit, time changes. Barry's origin is an alteration of time. Time constantly changes, ever so slightly. And there's people with mentalities to fix time. So that's a stabilizing element, and there's people who want to exploit time. That's a chaotic element. So we have this balance between chaos and order in terms of the solidity of time. Now, we can expect that there are periods where time would be extra stable and less stable. In the DC Comics universe, we have experienced with Wave Rider, the character, not the ship, a manipulation of time outside of time. So something happens in an area of time outside of regular time, something tragic happens, and Wave Rider reverts the time around him to a point where time gets fixed. So you have a second scale of time in existence. What if this second scale of time in existence existed in the DC universe, and someone who time traveled within a time ship on a scale beyond the first scale, altered time. So you would have the exact same concept as time manipulation. Groups of people who are used to one history will preserve their history. and groups of people who want to exploit one type of history will exploit one type of history. With someone applying chaotic and non-chaotic elements to the second scale of time, you would have multiple similar but different histories, crucially different histories, with different groups of time travelers in different histories, creating chaos and creating disorder. So, history and destiny being like an iceberg that continually melts and refreezes is like a temporal shape, whereas the parallel realities are a temporal form. You know that existing, if I kill you in your past, you would cease to exist. But it sometimes takes a little while, depending on how much you've time traveled. And from what perspective is this change? If we both start off from the same point, and I 5 minutes after this one point decided to go back in time, and 40 minutes later I killed you, 45 minutes would have passed for me. But if you then vanish 50 minutes after that one point, that'd be 50 minutes for your point. So a second scale perspective on time of, perspective on time travelers where I'm one level beyond the time travelers. Time, causality would take time itself, because time itself is a substance, and time itself as a substance would itself be bound by the laws of time. So if I can change time, and time is a substance, in order to change time, time needs to be a substance, and time as a substance would itself have its own time, and that's what sums up the second scale of time travel, right? I'm dragging, I know, but you're a time traveler, you have to go back in time. In order to do that, you need to take your own time with you, so time itself needs to be something. In order to time travel within a time pocket outside of time, you need to reach a different level of time, or a different scale of time. Now, the question is it branching? Is it I go to a second scale of time, therefore I create parallel groupings of time, the multiverse, therefore I am responsible for the multiverse? Or is it the multiverse created itself as a consequence of simple time travel, because time itself is a substance, and if time itself is a substance, by having points where time is extra chaotic and extra stable, if time itself is extra chaotic and extra stable, you have there's this event in the Marvel universe where planets show up, different versions of planet Earth show up adjacent to each other on a multiversal scale. So you look up and there's this point where another Earth wants to connect to your Earth, and if it collapses into your Earth, it collapses your universe. So I'm really dragging here. The point is, if you are a time traveler and time is a substance that it can do X, Y, Z, do alternate realities come into existence, alternate temporal forms come into existence like a branching tree as a result of simple time travel, which amasses different areas of time stability? Or is it you on a second layer, a second scale of time created this branching tree of possibilities? And then when you think about that, it's a question of who caused the collapse? Who causes events in Marvel and DC where the multiverses collapse in on each other and reform and reshape history? Because in Marvel, we know that there's something like 6 iterations of history existing, the multiverse collapsing and coming into existence. And it's like, in DC we have this 52. We have this simplification of 52. But what if instead of 52 becoming 53, becoming more and more and more, it's more like there's already 53 places in existence, but adjacent to those, there's different groupings, different multiversal clusters of existence who we just are not connecting. And if we have different clusters and clusters and clusters of existence in the thousands, then are we even real? Are the characters in there even real? Because they are essentially concepts. And the nature of comic books raises this question of whether existence is existence or if existence is a dream, to a level where it's like every person a superhero knows is either usually gets reinvented, right? They usually get reinvented as some sort of concept, some sort of hero. If you dated someone, your date will become a superhero, likely, or a supervillain. That's a likely concept. If you knew someone in high school, oh, that guy in high school, he's a supervillain now, so on, whatever. You don't really have a lot of normal people. You don't really have a strong ratio of a lot of normal people to some superhero people. You have something like a not 1-to-1, maybe it's 2-to-1, but you have people who anyone you know becomes a superhero, right? Think about the Flash's universe. Barry's dad turns out to be a Flash from a different reality, in a different causality, in a different history. His dad becomes the Flash. I mean, come on, think about it. Why is Killer Frost so arbitrarily evil? Maybe she's connected to a version of herself. Maybe all the versions of Caitlin are connected to a version of Caitlin which channeled the Chitona, the Kryptonian goddess of ice, which she also has white hair and is a goddess of ice. I mean, come on. Superman and Supergirl. Superman is just Superman. His existence is mandatory. In a world where supervillains and superheroes exist and there's time travel, there will inevitably be a sort of Charlie Chaplin effect. So Charlie Chaplin came in third in a Charlie Chaplin look-alike contest. If you are Superman and existence keeps repeating itself, keeps changing, and there's infinite occasions where you have someone time traveling to meet Superman, by being a superhero, by being a symbol, you are attractive to time travelers. A time traveler paying attention to you will also sometimes pay attention to look-alike contests or coincidences where you run into someone who looks like you. Maybe it doesn't happen all that often, but when it does happen, it will become memorable to someone who time travels. Now, if someone who time travels has realized that a version of you is dead in a certain point of time, but you yourself need to die heroically doing something, wouldn't the time traveler just pick up this random stranger who kind of looks like you and put him in a certain spot, pulling in more and more attention to that person? If someone goes back in time and all the superheroes are dead, and he notices that there's this symbol that kind of looks like this one guy who knows symbol, and this one symbol that looks like the guy you know symbol is the symbol of a product of a. What if Coca-Cola had a logo that looked like the Superman X, sort of? Wouldn't someone pay extra attention to that thing? And if you needed to go back in time and fix something on a large scale, and you knew knowledge of the future of how market trends shift across decades, taking over a company which vaguely reminds you of some guy you knew, and ending up by accident molding commercials to fit vague representations of the memory of the person you lost, or the person who you know will come into existence in the future. Those vague representations of someone's history become stronger in the popular culture consciousness, and those concepts, by filtering through something like a brand, or maybe some religious institution someone used to go to when they were young or whatever, those concepts echo through the zeitgeist, making the person who comes into existence later on more likely. But if someone goes through this scenario where your friend is gonna appear in 2010 or whatever, and you need to go back in time to fix a chaotic problem that some bad guy created like 80 years ago. If you go back 80 years ago and this bad guy actually kills one of the ancestors of your friend, and you're like, no, and you're stuck with having to manage history from that point on, because you cannot interfere with your own history across time. If you go back in time 80 years and your friend's grandpa is dead, but you still know the family, what if you decided to befriend the family that your friend was going to come out of, right? And you play matchmaker because, well, this guy's your friend. You gotta look after his family, and you gotta look after the world at the same time. So you have someone who is connected to a family and who has this strong sense of a need, a will, this awareness of the world, and becomes charismatic by leading a company and knowing things. So this person who is friends with these people pays extra attention to these people, and these people grow up in an environment where these concepts in the brand of this art guy become stronger and stronger, remembered in their world view. And at some point, you figure out that there's going to be an event which creates power, and you tell someone of the family, well, here's my history, this is what happened. You're not him, but you are quasi-related to him, only you have a completely different grandmother and a slightly different mother and whatever. So some guys, a couple have a son, and that son marries the daughter of the woman who was going to be the mother of your friend. You have let's call it a quad or whatever. Like, not your clone, not your you, but someone who is quasi-related to you from 80 years ago on a time travel level. And you might have actually affected the decision of that person's name, right? So you have Superman who's not Superman, and you have Superman. Not necessarily Superman. Maybe you have Batman who's not Batman. Maybe you have an alternative version of Bruce Wayne whose mom is a redhead and not a blonde, and he has a completely different features, but three of his grandparents are identical to the grandparents of the first Bruce Wayne, and this leads to a replica Batman who looks differently from the initial Batman. But because this replica Batman exists in his own stable timeline, where heroes and villains are going to time travel around, they're going to ensure the history and ensure the collapse of the history of a certain individual, and you have different faces of Batman who are in adjacent historical stabilities, the form of time. That's how you create a parallel reality. You continually reinforce, melt and refreeze history and destiny, which are like an iceberg, but if the iceberg breaks, the chunk of the iceberg that's broken off becomes its own history and destiny, and sometimes someone goes back and forth and and revitalizes one timeline. Sometimes someone emboldens a timeline, makes a timeline come to life rather than be a ghost of itself. So you have ghost timelines here and there, but ghost timelines, by being strong shapes in time, because time itself is a substance, wouldn't time itself as a substance more quickly shape itself around either timeline? So you have a timeline where Bruce Wayne looks this way and a timeline where Bruce Wayne looks that way. And those two different Bruce Waynes have different approaches to things, but because they're both Bruce Wayne, they come into existence so often, time itself stabilizes more toward those individual timelines, and it's a question of, if you have 52 adjacent multiverses, wouldn't they themselves have hundreds of adjacent multiverses which are accessible from a point outside of Earth causality? So if you go to Mars, would Mars have the same exact 52 adjacent timelines, or would Mars have 7 or 17 adjacent timelines? Would there be a Krypton multiverse where there's 1,000 adjacent, parallel realities? So it's like the difference between temporal shape and temporal force. And if the source wall is a consequence of the existence of ancient hyper-evolved beings which have evolved past our expectation of reality, and the source wall itself is a concept, that explains a lot about what the source wall does in the DC multiverse, because there are various different things which relate to the source wall, points of time where the source wall opens up and different things happen. Sometimes the Green Lanterns shoot out of existence, show up in a different reality which is empty, and this different reality which is empty, there's a crack in the source wall, and they go through this crack and show up in the modern day. Sometimes something else happens, and that's the DC multiverse. The physics and existence of comic book worlds, comic book multiverses, magic, and whatever.